That guy's gonna be some senator one day.
Temporary glitch there. But welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new episode of the Jesse Hughes Show. I am hoping that you guys are all excited to be back. You might notice this is a Wednesday. We usually do this on Friday. What are we doing? Well, my schedule is crazy. As you guys may know, I'm in law school. And I am also working a part-time job to help pay for law school and to help pay for the fact that I'm getting married in June. So we had to switch things around a little bit. We are moving to a Wednesday show, and we might do some Friday extra fun things here and there, but expect the show to be on Wednesdays from now on about this time. As always, ceremonial chair wine sip. Usually we got a can, now we have a cup. Either way, chair wine, the best. So, what is a nation? And what is nationalism? These are questions and topics that have been frequently debated, especially since Trump's re-election in 2024. It's something that if you spend any time online, you spend any time on X, you see people talking about left and right. What is a nation? What is an American? What does it mean that the United States is a nation? And a big factor in all of this is the fact that for so long we have seen political elites in both parties pushing the idea of mass immigration and saying that anyone can come here and be an American. Is that true? The signs point towards probably not, but it's a question that still gets asked and debated a lot. And today it had there's a particular emphasis around it because yesterday, Senator from Missouri, Eric Schmidt, Republican, gave a speech at the National Conservatism Conference delving into this topic. I would encourage you to go and watch the entire speech for yourself or read the transcript of the speech that was published through the Daily Signal, the news arm of the Heritage Foundation. Senator Schmidt basically breaks down this question, what is a nation, what is an American, by looking at the history, the tradition, and the people who built this nation. Oftentimes in the topic of nationhood and nationalism, you have people who say that America is a propositional nation. America is just an idea. It's something that anyone could grasp. And Senator Schmidt soundly rejects that premise. He made a point. He said if we took the American Constitution and dropped it in Kazakhstan, they wouldn't all of a sudden become Americans because they are from Kazakhstan. A nation, in my view, and this is a view shared by many others, is a particular place with a particular people of a common lineage who share a particular language and have a shared religion and shared traditions. Now, some of these factors, in my opinion, weigh more than the other ones do. For example, a particular people with a common lineage. Now, I don't believe that to be 100% true, but I do believe it to be 95% true. A lot of times people look at the common lineage part and make maybe too much of ethnicity. I think there is an American ethnicity that can be clearly defined, and it's a shame that we have not promulgated that idea more. But I think that it is possible for a select small group, for few people to be able to come here and assimilate into the culture and become Americans through immigration. That is not what we have right now. What we have right now is mass immigration of millions of people per year who don't assimilate, who don't share our values, and come from cultures that I think it is a lot harder and maybe even in some cases impossible to assimilate to our values. But that is a topic for another day and a discussion that needs to be had more in length at another time. What I am here to discuss is that in reply to Senator Schmidt's speech, a gentleman named Alex Nor No Rafsta, my apologies, I have no idea how to say that. We'll call him Alex from the Cato Institute. No disrespect meant by that, I just don't know how to say this last name. This gentleman replied with an article that was written in winter of 2024, published through the Cato Institute, called The Case Against Nationalism, arguing that America is actually not a nation, and it's good that it's not. Now, I replied to this saying that I would be responding to the arguments made in this article tonight on my show. Alex from the Cato Institute asked me if I was going to have him on. Sure, why not? I said, do you want to come on? Are you free tonight around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time? If so, you can come on. And I never heard from him again all day. So, Alex, if you want to come on, defend your article, and tell me how I properly say your last name, um, there is an open invite. Anytime you want to record, let's do it. But in the meantime, since he never responded to me, we will be going through this article. And as a added bonus treat, I saw in another X post that Alex claimed that people who were arguing against the article didn't actually read it. So I printed the whole thing out and am ready to respond in kind. It is written by our friend Alex from the Cato Institute and co-written by Ilya Somin, who is a professor of law at George Mason University and B. Kenneth Seaman Chair in Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. Our friend Alex is the Vice President for Economic and Social Policies at the Cato Institute. So, the case against nationalism. Let's go through this. Nationalism has become a dominant ideology on the American political right and has gained ground in many European countries over the last decade. I wonder why. This has happened without sufficient attention to the dangers inherent in nationalism, dangers evident in theory and in practice in this latest iteration of nationalism as well as prior ones. Nationalism is particularly dangerous in a diverse nation like the United States, where it is likely to exacerbate conflict. The ideology is virtually impossible to separate from harmful ethnic and racial discrimination of a kind conservatives would readily condemn in other contexts. I disagree with that point. We'll get to that in a minute. Like socialism, it always goes back to socialism with the libertarians. Like so excuse me. Like socialism, with which it has important similarities, nationalism encourages harmful government control over the economy. Nationalism also poses a threat to democratic institutions. Finally, nationalist ideology is at odds with America's foundational principles, which are based on universal national rights, not ethnic particularism. None of that is true. In crucial ways, nationalism is just socialism with different flags and more ethnic chauvinism. All Americans, but especially traditional conservatives, classical liberals, and libertarians, should recognize nationalism's dangers and recommit instead to the core principles of our founding. Now, I will continue to go through this article in just a moment. But from the outset, obviously, this guy doesn't like nationalism. I don't know if you could tell. Um, First off, and I'm sure he will explain this, or they will, there two people wrote this, they will explain this as the article goes on, but the claim that it is at odds with America's foundational principles, first and foremost, is not one that is rooted in history, at least in the reading of history that I've done. I've done a lot of reading on the founding of our nation. It's a particular area of interest for me based on universal national rights, not ethnic particularism. So the first thing I did was I pulled some quotes from the founding fathers just because I'll see if it gets into this in the article, but in his tweet he said America is not a nation and it's good that it's not. John Jay, in Fairless Paper number 2, 1787, said, Providence has been pleased to give this one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, very similar in their manner and customs. This country and this people seem to have been made for each other. George Washington, in his farewell address in 1796, said, The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. James Madison, in Fairless Papers number 14. The kindred blood which flows in the veins of American citizens, the mingled blood of the whole people, is the best security for the duration of the Union. And finally, Benjamin Franklin, in a letter written in 1783, said, We are now a nation, and it is in our power to make ourselves a happy one, if we do not wantonly throw away the blessings we have acquired. So those are just quotes from the Founding Fathers, some of them, but also just a quick glance at history. Yes, the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. That is something I believe. I believe that all men are created equal in the sight of God in terms of their worth and value. Now, some are smarter, some are more athletic, some are stronger, some are more suited for this purpose, some are more suited for that purpose. In that case, we're not all equal. And I think anyone who has eyes plainly can see that. However, from a spiritual standpoint, yes, we are all created equal. We are all equal in worth and dignity. We are all equal in sin, in the fact that we have sinned against God. I affirm that. The Founding Fathers affirmed that. However, you also have to look at the policies of the Founding Fathers and the way that they set up the nation and the way the nation operated when it was first founded. You hear a lot of times libertarians, like this gentleman, like to say that we need to go back to our founding principles. So what were our founding principles? Well, first you had the Naturalization Act in the late early 1800s, which severely limited immigration in an effort to protect the people that the founding fathers created a nation for. On the subject of universal human rights, there was broadly freedom of religion, but there was also, I don't know, prohibitions against non-Protestants running for office in many of the states, established churches in several of the states, blasphemy laws in all of the states. These were things that were common. So I don't hear many libertarians advocating for these principles, and whether or not these are things that we should have today is a question of prudence, one that can be debated. I would argue most of them might serve a good purpose in our system today. However, that's something we can debate. However, it's always funny to me that they always talk about going back to the founding principles, universal human rights, and conveniently ignore the many, 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 many policies and practices of the time that go completely against the very thing that they are claiming the founding represented. Something to think about. Moving on, what is nationalism? Back to the article. American conservatism is a dynamic movement that has shifted its ideological emphasis over the last several decades. True, and I would say that they have shifted for the better. In the aftermath of the September 11th attacks on the United States, neoconservatism was briefly ascendant. I would say it was more ascendant before that and has continued to be up until the last few years. After the financial crisis of the 2008 to 2009, a quasi-libertarian Tea Party that emphasized free markets and government restraint come to the fore. The rise of Donald Trump marked another ideological shift, this time towards nationalism, a fuzzy concept that includes national greatness, toughness, support for entitlement programs, excuse me, and greater skepticism of interactions with foreigners through trade and immigration. President Trump used the term in 2018 to surmise his own ideology. Quote, "You know, they have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called nationalist. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist. Use that word. Use that word." It's hard to read a Trump quote and not do the voice. Um, all right, we're going to pause for a second. Neoconservatism was the dominant ideology of the right wing before September 11th, so I'm not quite sure where that claim comes from. I mean, if you look at the first Bush administration, if you look at elements of the Reagan administration, even, yes, it was in an anti communist context. However, that was the birth of neoconservatism. I mean, look at the popularity that a man like William Buckley had with National Review. Neoconservatism seemed, yeah, it was ascendant that entire time, not just after 9/11. Sure, you can argue that after 9/11, maybe there was a bit more in terms of the prowess of it. However, I mean, its history traces back farther than that. The rise of Donald Trump. Okay, so he defines nationalism as a funny, or at least Trump's brand of nationalism, as a fuzzy concept that includes national greatness. Who wouldn't support that? Toughness. I mean, Reagan was out here touting peace through strength. Trump is touting peace through strength. Even the most ardent isolationists that I know say that we at least need to be strong enough to protect our own country from outside invasion, so I'm not sure, where that comes from. Support for entitlement programs. Okay, so yeah, Trump is a supporter of Social Security and similar entitlement programs. However, he comes at it from what I understand, and maybe I'm just reading the room wrong. He comes at it from a place of we do need some sort of limited social net that is being abused right now and needs to be greatly reformed. I go back and forth on this issue personally. I think that the church needs to take a greater role in that, but whether or not there should be some government social, again, this is a question of prudence that can be argued. So, and greater skepticism of interactions with foreigners through trade and immigration. Again, something I completely agree with. Trump's policy positions and rhetorical style differed from those of others on the political right, prompting some conservative intellectuals to attempt to construct a coherent ideology around their new figurehead's pronouncements. Intellectuals may be less important to the conservative movement than they were in years past, but they crave an ideological consistent model of the world in which to place Trump, the apparent leader of the modern American conservatism. Yeah, that is true. A lot of people don't know what to do with Trump. Previous strains of conservatism were bound to a degree by the three-legged ideological, my bad, stool of traditional religious morality, American interventionist leadership in world affairs, and free market economics. Trump broke that stool and replaced it with nationalism, or at least that's what conservative intellectuals like Yoram Hazony, Rich Lowry, and a coterie of national conservatives have tried to fill the gap with. Trump, Hazoni, and Lowry insist on using the word nationalism to describe their ideology, with the latter two spilling the ink trying to distinguish it from patriotism. Side note, read Yorm Hazoni, my bad. Read his book, Nationalism. It's a good book. But what does nationalism mean? The meaning of nationalism has been the topic of much debate on the right in recent years, but is necessary to discuss again here because American defenders of nationalism, as well as others from the Anglosphere, have done a poor job of defining their core ideology for an American audience. Hazoni writes that a nation is a number of tribes with a common language or religion and a past history acting as a body of the common defense and other large-scale enterprises. The world is governed best, he adds, when nations are able to chart their own independent course, cultivating their own traditions and pursuing their own interests without interference. Curiously, he also argues that nations that conquer others are not real nationalist entities, yet virtually every major power that exists today has an extensive history of conquest. Indeed, under Hazoni's definition, most states in the West, including most European countries that developed rapidly in the 19th and 20th centuries, are not real nation states. I will say I do disagree to an extent with Hazoni on that one. Do I think that nations should make it their business to go around invading other nations? No. However, I also believe in a very old concept called right of conquest. If you take the land, if you hold the land, it's yours. That's why I don't get caught up in what's going on this side of the world or on that side of the world. Yes, I want peace. I've advocated for peace in Ukraine and in Israel and all across the world on this platform several times. However, I do not make it a habit of getting worked up about those conflicts or paying too much attention to them because my main area of focus lies here at home, where I think it needs to be. Lowry, meanwhile, defines nationalism as love of one's culture, language, history, institutions, holidays, and everything good in a nation. Under this definition, nationalism does not imply dislike of foreigners, but instead an ideological love for one's fellow citizens based on shared cultural characteristics. Yet Lowry's definition renders nationalism indistinguishable from patriotism, a word that's supposed to mean something else, according to nationalists themselves. I mean, there is overlap. There's for sure overlap between patriotism and nationalism. I would say nationalism is a bit stronger, is a bit more nation focused, and in my opinion does a better job of advocating the interest of the nation itself. That's why I would say I am a nationalist. That's why I would particularly describe myself as a Christian nationalist. I subscribe to that view. There are 1,000 different definitions for what that means, and nobody seems to know for sure what the right one is. However, if asked to just briefly describe what I mean by that, I would say that I believe that a nation is a political gathering of a common people with a common language, common traditions, etc., who form a government that submits itself to the Christian God, to Jesus Christ, which I believe is the right thing to do. And I believe that there's a lot of historical precedent for that in church history for why nations should do that. The Bible obviously says that God instituted the government, God instituted the civil magistrates to restrain evil, to punish evil, and to promote what is good. At the basic definitional level, that is government's job, and I think we should be promoting that. I've talked more about this in the past. I probably plan on talking more about it in the future. This is a very long article, so we are going to move on. One of the great failures of these and other definitions of nationalism is that they are purely theoretical and bear almost no relationship to how nationalism actually exists. Nationalists in the real world know what they're signed up for. Intellectuals who argue otherwise are fooling themselves. Here we go. Real world nationalism is a primitive, statist, protectionist, anti capitalist xenophobic, and often ethnocentric proto-ideology of my tribe best, your tribe bad, with the tribe lying at the core. Indeed, the Latin root of the word nationalism, natio, means a race of people or tribe. This is how nationalism is understood in Europe and the rest of the world, and why most Americans recoil from it, preferring instead to think of nationalism as a form of super patriotism, or assumes that the terms nation and country are synonymous. At root, nationalism is an ideology of group rights that denigrates individualism in favor of an abstraction called the nation. Its foundational principle is that government exists primarily to protect the culture and interest of the nation or its dominant group. This implies that the government can use its authority to protect the national culture against potential dangers, including other domestic groups and the potential spread of their cultures. To promote the dominant group, government must have the power to act assertively on its behalf, which necessarily means constraining others. Yes, that's the job of the government. You have to constrain certain people. You have to constrain certain attitudes and certain behaviors. That's what laws are for. If we didn't constrain things, it's almost like we would have a society where men can become women, children can get taught pornography in schools, people could get abortions on demand, excuse me, and anybody could come across the border at any time with no vetting whatsoever. Oh, wait. That sounds awful familiar, doesn't it? Sounds awful familiar. This ethnocentrism thing always gets me. There are some people, some who I am friends with, who do think that at the core of American identity is the fact that the majority of people in the country are white. And while that has historically certainly been true, I don't think that's the core of America's identity. I think Anglo-Protestantism broadly does have a lot to do with what's the core of American identity. I don't like getting into the racial stuff. It's not it's not my place. It's not really the thing that I really hang my hat on. There are other people who have, other ideas and other viewpoints on this, and we can disagree and be friends. That's fine. However, I'm not, me personally, if I were to set immigration policy, for one, the immigration quota would be like 50,000 people a year, probably. Way less than we have now. But if there's somebody from a culture who I think based on a extensive background check and questionnaire, finding out what they're all about, what their beliefs are, etc., who looks slightly different than me but is has a high capacity to actually assimilate into the culture that we're building here in America, I'd be fine with that person coming in. I don't care what they look like. Christian nationalism is the path we must go. I agree, Red Virginia Politics. Thank you. Back to this article. I don't know how much of this I can get through, I'm going to be honest. Hazoni recognizes as much, noting that his theory of nationalism requires that within each state there be a majority nation whose dominance is plain and in question and against which resistance appears to be futile. I don't disagree with that. He does not seem to be adverse to the use of coercion to maintain cultural dominance within a nation. Again, I don't disagree with that. Now, does that coercion always have to be through the state? Not necessarily. I think there are proper uses of state power and prudent uses of state power that we can discuss and decide, what is the rightful role of the government in this? What powers should they be allowed to possess? I have friends who are monarchists who think that it should be every single one under the sun. And then I have friends who think that it should be extremely limited. I think that I fall somewhere in the middle. I would probably most align myself with the Federalist during the early American period. I have some disagreements with them on some things. That's again a debate for a different day. But back to the main point. Coercion doesn't necessarily always have to be government power. It can also be social coercion. One thing I advocate for is the idea of cultural Christianity. Some Christians like to say cultural Christianity was this bad thing because it creates a false sense of salvation in some people. And while that might certainly be true in some cases, I would rather live in a place that is culturally Christian. I grew up in a culturally Christian town in North Carolina. Most people in the town went to church. It was expected of you to go to church on Sunday. That has been eroded since I was a child, and it's not as much now. But when I was growing up, it was expected you go to church, you obey your parents, you live and act like a Christian. And to the great dismay of figures like Russell Moore, I actually converted and became a Christian because of that early in my life. It's possible. Cultural Christianity, I think, is a good thing. Back to the article. Lowry is less explicit on this point, but his definition too logically entails coercive enforcement on a common culture. If civil society or markets begin to erode or transform the common culture he claims lays at the heart of the nation, the government would have to either preserve that culture's dominance by force or accept the dilution or disappearance of what Lowry views as the nation's essence. Yeah, believe it or not, free markets are not a god. I generally like free markets. However, complete anarchy in the market is not a good thing. I mean, look at what's going on in America right now with some of the economic things that are going on. No, I don't think BlackRock should be allowed to go in and buy up all the single family homes that it can get its hands on. No, I don't think that foreign nationals like the Chinese should be buying up farmland in the United States, or any land for that matter. No, I don't think that usury should be allowed, and I don't think that we should be charging exorbitant interest rates for things like credit card debt. The free market is completely fine with these things. I am not. I think that they are corrosive. You can disagree with me, but I mean, here's the thing. Like, free markets, capitalism generally has been a better economic system than most. However, it's not as if it's flawless. There is no human ideology or no or human system or anything that is flawless. And the prudence of a good government would be to identify where the flaws are and to put in place safeguards to protect against them. Even the founders believed this. Yes, they believed in a limited form of government, but they still believed in using government power in a limited sense to rein in things that would be harmful to society. Again, in the Federalist Papers, I believe it was Madison that wrote that if men were angels, government wouldn't even be necessary at all. And at the same time, if all if the government was ran by angels, then we wouldn't need constraints on power. I do believe we do need some constraints on power because men are sinful and will do sinful things. However, I also think it's completely appropriate for the government to have power and to use that power to constrain against evil. These are things that every American believed were logical up until apparently 5 minutes ago. Nationalists often define a nation in terms of what it's not. That frame naturally applies to immigrants who hail from foreign countries and are therefore not part of the nation. I mean, to a certain extent, true. I mean, me personally, I wasn't born here. I was born in Russia. I was adopted by American citizens when I was 5 months old. Again, I think that there is a distinction that can be made again between cultural backgrounds and people who are able to assimilate into the culture better and those that are not. I do believe in very massive restrictions on immigration. However, if you are not from here and you're not a citizen, you are not part of the nation. I mean, that for one is very obvious. And if you do immigrate here, I think that there needs to be a very, very long, like 20 years long assimilation process to ensure that you actually do assimilate into the cultural values before you're granted full citizenship. That is just my view. But also rarely applies to nationalist fellow citizens. Nationalists in the United States routinely single out groups that are not real Americans. Claremont Institute senior fellow Glenn Elmers, to take just one example, has written that the 81 million Americans who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 are not Americans in any meaningful sense of the term. I mean, you can make a solid argument for that based on looking at the things that they support and the policies that they support and how that is tearing apart the fabric of the nation. But who are the real Americans in a country as diverse as the United States? Oh, here we go. The obvious starting point is those who support nationalism. Policy disagreements hinging on such support often devolve into battles between authentic and inauthentic Americans who are seeking to undermine the nation. When confronted with nationalist-endorsed political loyalty test, those of us who fail are disloyal not just to a political program but to the nation itself. I mean, let's be real here. There are common values, there are common traditions, there is a common heritage that for most of America's history did bind this nation. Somebody in the chat is calling me a libtard. That is, buddy, come on. There are common things, heritage, traditions, and for most of American history, religion, that being Christianity, bound the nation together. And if you deny those things, if you're working against those things, then yes, there is a solid argument that you are not acting in America's interest, that you are not acting within the value system, you are not acting like an American. I mean, look at what happened in the 50s. The American hero, and I mean this literally, I think he was an American hero, Joseph McCarthy, headed a committee called the Committee on Un-American Activities, singling out communists during the Red Scare. McCarthy was right. We should have listened to him. These people were not acting like Americans. I fully support the idea of denaturalization for some people. We have politicians who are running for office or who are in office right now who say that they are representing the interest of foreign countries, not the United States. In my view, those people are not Americans because they are not representing the interest of the United States. They're not. They're not Americans in my view. Alright, you know what? I'm done with this. Name a single communist in Congress. Bernie Sanders. Anyway, so the main gist of his article seems to be this contention that he thinks that nationalism is in itself un-American because it goes against these ideas of like free market capitalism and is too focused on heritage and lineage and all this stuff. Well, for one, I find it ironic he's calling it un-American when he just railed against nationalists, describing others as un-American, but that's a different point for a different day. The main thing that I wanted to focus on with that is just this insane idea that you can claim that America is not a nation, that it was not founded as a nation, that its founding fathers did not believe in the idea of nationhood. I just read you some quotes from the founding fathers describing the United States as a nation, a place that has a common heritage, a common people, a common history, a common language, a common religion. Things that, for most of human history, again, up until 5 minutes ago, again, up until the post war consensus took hold, were considered valid descriptions of what a nation should be and were accepted by most of the population. Some people don't like that because it creates this idea of hierarchies. Hierarchies are a good thing. I'm sorry, they just are. Can they be abused? Yes, but in principle, they are a good thing. Nationalism, in my view, is a good thing. And I understand the critiques and criticisms, but they don't hold water, in my opinion. Because most of the people, and I'm not sure 100% what the positions of this gentleman from the Cato Institute are, though I think I could guess. I'm not sure what 100% what his positions are, but most of the people you see critiquing nationalism now are either devoted to this idea of secular liberalism, which has proven to be a failure, are devoted to completely unrestricted free markets, which is a horrible idea and completely imprudent, or are just completely crazy. A lot of people want mass immigration because they think that it's good for the market. It might be good for the market, but it's not good for the country. What is always good for the market is not always good for the country. And it is the government's job in prudence to follow that, or to take that into consideration and to do what is best for the people that put it in place. All right, we need another sip of chair wine after that. Moving on. You might have saw over the weekend, as I did, a crazy rumor started circulating around the internet. I was coming home from a college football game at Liberty University where I go, and I checked Twitter for the first time after the entire game. And I saw these crazy rumors that Trump might be dead. Now, where did this come from? Well, for the last 6 or 7 months, we're in what, September now. Wow, it's crazy to think that we're in September now. This year has flown by. For the last 9 months, actually, since January, Trump has been nonstop. Always in front of a camera, always speaking to the press, always doing this, always doing that. He's always out in public, he's always out and about, he's always in the spotlight. And for a few days, he just happened to say, you know what, I'm going to take a break for a minute. I think we're doing some good stuff. I'm going to take a break for a minute. And appears. And the left lost its collective mind, claiming that he must be dead. I don't want to spend too much time on this just because of how ridiculous it is, but it just shows you the power and the influence that Trump has, that if he disappears from the public spotlight for just a second, people all of a sudden think he's dead. I mean, that's kind of crazy, don't you? Don't you think that's kind of crazy? All right, we are running very late tonight. So for the last thing, kind of a deviation away from politics. A lot of you guys know I'm college football fans, which means this is probably where a lot of you check out, but it's fine. We had a crazy weekend of college football games this past weekend. Bill Belichick sucks. I'm just going to say it. But in the aftermath of this college football weekend, we got a brand new AP top 25 poll. And this is, for me, disappointing, and I'll explain why in a second. But we're going to go for this and just briefly analyze each team, and this won't take long. But starting off, number one, Ohio State. Previously at number 3, jumped to number 1 after beating Texas. Not a surprise. They looked good. They looked dominant. Their defense is it looked like an NFL defense. they are going to be very good this year. They are probably a lock for the playoffs. Number two, Penn State. Penn State's just going to go 10-2 again, make the playoffs, and then lose a big game. I mean, that's just what happens. Number three, LSU, who defeated Clemson. LSU looked really good. I watched that game. They kind of started off a little slow, but they had a very good, they had very good defense, very good offense. Garrett Nussmeier, great quarterback. Not sure if he's Heisman caliber. I know he's been in those conversations, but if you're looking for a quarterback to support this year, hop on the Nuss bus. Number four, Georgia. They played Marshall. They played a solid G5 team in Marshall, but not much to take away there. I mean, obviously, we know Kirby Smart usually always has a great defense. Last year, they were actually a little bit lacking, which was surprising. But traditionally, Kirby Smart has good teams. I expect Georgia to be in playoff consideration all year. Number five, Miami. This one was a surprise for me. Miami handled Notre Dame pretty well. Um, Carson Beck, I don't think needs to still be playing college football. However, he is still playing college football. He made some errant throws and got really bailed out by great receivers, including former Liberty wide receiver and star CJ Daniels. If you haven't seen a clip of that throw, you need to go check it out. That catch was insane. Miami, I think Beck has enough there to keep them in contention for most of the year. They might be the best or one of the best ACC teams. They will definitely be in the ACC championship. It'll be interesting to see how Beck develops throughout the year, over the year. I mean, we've already seen his play at Georgia. We know how he can handle himself in the SEC. It'll be interesting to see. Number eight, Oregon. I don't even remember who they played, but Oregon, Dan Lanning, good coach, good team. Probably going to be a good team this year. Probably going to handle the Big Ten pretty well. They should not be in the Big Ten. They should not be in the Big Ten. The Pac 12 should never have died. I hate conference realignment. Seven, Texas lost to Ohio State. Arch Manning. Arch Manning. The hype. The hype that man was given. He was going to be a generational quarterback. He was going to be the next best great thing. He was going to be the next Tim Tebow. He could pan out to be that. It was one game against a very good Ohio State, but Arch Manning did not look like the generational talent that he was propped up to be by most fans and most in the sports media. He could develop over the year. That's certainly possible, and he could turn out to be very good. Who knows? We'll see. Number eight, Clemson lost to LSU. I think Clemson is an interesting case because they took they're a team. Dabo Sweeney hates the transfer portal. Does not tries not to take players out of the transfer portal. And I mean, they've still had a good bit of success over the years. I do think that they'll compete in the ACC. It'll be interesting to see a coach with a more traditional mindset navigating this new world and hope maybe finding success. Number nine, Notre Dame. It's Notre Dame. They had a really good year last year, but I mean, traditionally, look at them. They'll find a way to get into the playoffs again, and we'll see what pans out from there. I don't have high expectations. Number 10, South Carolina. This is a team, Lenoris Sellers is going to be a threat in the SEC this year. He is going to be in Heisman contention all year. He had some moments in the game against Virginia Tech where he didn't look the best, but South Carolina, I think, will handle business. I think they'll be a playoff team this year. They were right on the verge last year. They were right on the verge. I think Shane Beamer can get them there. 11, Illinois. I honestly did not keep up with that game. I'm not sure. Arizona State's at 12. Florida at 13 is interesting to me because last year you had every single person in the Florida fan base calling for Billy Napier's head. You had boosters at Florida that were trying to get and collect the money to pay off his buyout because Florida at the beginning of the season last year was doing horrendously. He was able to turn it around in the latter half of the season. DJ Lagway, I think, is going to be a very solid quarterback this year. Billy Napier's seat has cooled down a bit, but I think it's still warm. And whatever happens in this season, this is his last chance. I think it's either he stays or he goes. There is no in between. He's either going to do well and stay, or things are gonna fall apart in the season, and he's going to get fired. There is no in between. He is not destined for a long run at Florida if they don't do well this year. Number 14, Florida State, we're skipping them. Number 15, Michigan. They were 7-5 last year, 8-5, I think, after their bowl win. Bryce Underwood, he's a freshman quarterback. He looks like he could be solid. I have concerns about whether or not he has a solid group of receivers. Now, obviously, a good quarterback is going to be able to make good with whatever he has. However, he's a true freshman. I think this year's definitely going to be a learning year. I don't expect them to be a playoff team. I think they'll have some success, but I don't expect them to be a playoff team. I think it's going to take a year of recruiting to get him some better weapons, both through high school and in the transfer portal, before we see Michigan really take off and have dominance again. Iowa State, good team. SMU, good team. Oklahoma didn't do great last year. I was a little surprised to see them ranked. It'll be interesting to see in their game against Michigan this week what happens. Texas A&M is going to go 8-4 just like they do every year. That's just their destiny. Ole Miss could be a playoff team. Ole Miss is pretty good. Alabama at 21. We're going to return to this. Tennessee at 22, they look like a good team. They'll do solid. Indiana at 23. Last year, Kirk Cignetti surprised some people. They had a good run. I don't know if they'll be able to replicate that success this year. Number 24, Texas Tech, coming out of the Big 12. I've heard some people pretty high on Texas Tech. I don't know enough about them. Same thing with 25, Houston. It'll be interesting to see how the year develops because as excuse me, as we all know, the Big 12 is the chaos conference. You never know what's going to happen in that conference. All right, circling back. 21. Alabama. For those of you who don't know me, I grew up an Alabama fan. Before I even knew what Liberty University was, I knew Crimson and White. I think my first words might have been Roll Tide. I grew up in the Saban era. I totally get it. I'm a spoiled fan who grew up in the best of times. I get it. I know from my parents, who are also Alabama fans, about the Mike Shula years and about the years before that. I've heard the great legends of the success of Bear Bryant and then the struggles that they went through after that. But I grew up during the height of the Alabama program with Nick Saban at the helm. I had the unique and distinct privilege of actually getting to meet Nick Saban in Washington, D.C. He is a wonderful man. Very down to earth, very nice. I I felt pain after losses, especially last year when Oklahoma and Vanderbilt happened. I felt pain after losses. I am willing, barely willing, to give Kalen the Boar a chance to redeem himself. I mean, obviously, we all know you don't want to be the man that follows the man. You want to be the man that follows the man that follows the man. He's got a lot on his shoulders, a lot of expectations from the fan base, a lot of pressure. I get it. I'm willing to give him a chance to change because he needs to change. Whatever that was on Saturday was unacceptable. No sense of urgency in any player on the field except maybe Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson played his heart out. He had an offensive line that couldn't stop mud running. It was like mud running through a screen door. They couldn't stop anything. Offensive line, horrible. Play calling, horrible. Defense, no sense of urgency. No sense of what it takes to actually play the game. The defense looked awful. That is not an Alabama team. I get it. He's not Nick Saban. It's not going to be completely the same as prior years. However, there is a standard. And a lot of these players were here when Saban was there. They know the standard. They know the process. They know what it takes to win. And it seems like they just all completely forgot how to even play football. This was disgraceful. It was just utterly and completely disgraceful. Kalen DeBoer has a very, very, very limited chance to improve this team, or else he's being shown the door. DeBoer will be out the door. I don't care that he has a $60 million buyout in his contract. They will find a way to pay that off. That's all I've got to say about that. Well, guys, thank you once again for joining me for another episode of the Jesse Hughes Show. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had a good time tonight. God loves you, and so do I. Thank you all for joining in and watching, and I hope that you have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next Wednesday.